Well, hello again, and welcome to Your Average Bear. I'm George, and today we've got this beauty. Started off as a painting video, but you notice it's not painted. What could I possibly have done to this that isn't paint? Yeah, magnetization. Imperial Guard Chimera. Let's take a look. So in my last project, I finished a squad of Imperial Guard troopers. It wasn't about the troopers, it was about testing a couple of different types of primer. So after I finished them, I started thinking about, well, what do I do next? Should I do something with the Death Watch that I'm really close to completing? Should I do something from the Imperial Guard, or should I try some Tau, or maybe redoing some Eldar? Decisions. And it hit me that I was really close to finishing the Imperial Bastion platoon that I ordered back in December. So, here's what I mean. Here's the Bastion platoon. I got this in December, and I have finished this guy, the Wyvern. I finished one of these, and I finished one of these, which means I only have the Chimera, the little walker dude, and the command squad left, and this box is done. So I think this is what I'm going to do. My next couple of projects, I'm going to work on the remaining kits, 1, 2, and 3, and finish this Bastion platoon before December rolls around, or before I get my next Christmas box, which I probably will be getting because that's what I do. I'll finish this box and hopefully the Tau box that I got as well. So for today's project, should be pretty straightforward. No magnetization. It's a Chimera. That's what I'm going to go with. It's a pretty straightforward build. It's a lot like this guy, except it doesn't have the big old turret. So let's get to building, shall we? I'm making some progress with this kit, so I thought I'd check in with you, my faithful viewers. It's been a pretty straightforward build so far. Here's the Chimera chassis, and I have the top part as well. This was kind of an interesting build. There's nothing quite like this that I've built so far. It's pretty neat, and I didn't think it was going to work, but obviously, it did. And I had actually started gluing stuff on because my thought was, it's a Chimera, right? It's simple, it's quick, it's easy. But as I was building, I was noticing certain things that I thought, I know this doesn't have to be magnetized, but it could be magnetized. And how neat would that be? So, I've thought it through a bit, and I decided this is going to be a magnetization video. It's not going to be too challenging. It's not going to be too bad. There's a couple of major components I'm going to magnetize because the tank looks really cool. I like the way it looks. It's a neat little vehicle. And the idea, at least right now, I hear from people who actually play the game and not just paint it, is that you want to make these as cheap as possible, which means you're not taking a bunch of the different options. But sometimes those different options look really cool. So I thought, well, let's make it so that you can swap out the options, and that way you can play it as a basic run-of-the-mill nothing Chimera, or I guess not and you could display it or have it around as the coolest version of itself. Which means I'm going to add a couple of things that you wouldn't necessarily add when you're playing with it. So for instance, I'm going to add the Dozer blade, but I don't want to pay for the Dozer blade if I ever field this. The Dozer blade is for hand-to-hand, like if you're charging into melee. That's not what this vehicle is about. So I'm going to put it on here in such a way that I can remove it when the time comes to field it. But I want to have it on here because, let's be honest, it looks pretty awesome. Kind of the same thing here, right? It has a flamer and a bolter. Or a heavy bolter. You could use either option, and normally I wouldn't bother with a heavy flamer. I would just glue the heavy bolter on here. But since I'm gonna magnetize anyway, let's make a day of it, right? So I'm gonna make the front facing weapons. I'm gonna make that magnetizable. Obviously, I'm gonna make the turret weapons magnetizable. That should be interesting. It's sort of straightforward, but it's also sort of not. When I get to that part of the video, I'll kind of show you what I mean. So it's going to be tricky. It'll be tricky to do all three versions of this weapon. It'll be straightforward to do just two different versions. You can swap up between those two, but let's go for broke. Let's do all three. And finally, again, totally unnecessary, but you know, I've got a YouTube channel, so let's make it happen, Captain. The pintle-mounted weapon. I think this stubber looks fantastic. I think the storm bolter looks fantastic. Now, if I'm going to play with this Chimera, I probably won't have either of them on this vehicle, but I kind of want the stubber hanging off here. It looks really cool. The only way to accomplish that is to magnetize it, and it looks tricky, but I think it's going to be not as tricky as it looks, but it's going to be labor intensive. So the first thing I'm going to do, because it seems like the easiest bit, is going to be to magnetize the front facing weapon. And you want to do this before you glue the top part of the tank on here, because you want to be able to get in here. Now ideally you would do this even before you glue this this whole piece to the chassis, but that ship has sailed. So my approach here is going to be to add some structural support behind there, right? So I'm going to use some of these guys. I'm going to cut them into size and I'm going to slide them in here. And so basically I'm going to create a back wall to where that hole is. To that back wall, I'm going to attach a magnet. And then to the back of each of these two weapons, I will also attach a magnet. So let's make that happen. All right. So I tried to get in there to add this piece, but it just wasn't going to happen. Not while this track was in here. There's probably other ways you could do this. You could probably fit some epoxy putty in there, and it should do the trick. It's probably the way I should have gone, but this track isn't really all that solidly attached to the hull, so let's just take it off and get in there to glue this part down. All right, so the previous approach was fine, but it didn't really accomplish what I wanted to. In order to get the magnet centered, I'd have to add several of those plastic deals, and they weren't really centered, and then drilling into them would be a thing. So I've decided I'm going to try something else. I got a little piece of plastic card. This one's pretty thick. You probably don't need anything quite this thick, but I'm going to add it back here, glue that down, and the magnet can rest right on the magnet, on the plastic card. I think that's going to be a cleaner approach, and it'll do exactly what I needed to do without a ton of muss or fuss. I've got a bit of a mess going here. My little plastic card did not stick to the model using plastic cement. I don't know why I thought that would work you know, plastic card is plastic, but I guess it's not that kind of plastic. And so I'm going to drill out this heavy bolter. You can see it's pretty, it's a solid piece, and I want to sink a magnet inside there that'll attach to the magnet that's going to go in here. That's a little different from this heavy flamer. This heavy flamer was actually hollow for the most part, so I had to fill this in, so I had something to drill into to sink a magnet in. So, you know, it's a little different pieces have different things you have to worry about. This isn't dry yet. I'm using, for this build, I'm using Tamiya putty, smooth type. I've never tried that before, but I thought I'd give it a shot since I really don't like using the quick type. It's really sticky and stuff. I'm hoping that this will work a little better. So far, I found it a little easier to use, but it's early times yet. So the first thing I need to do is I need to drill a guide hole in this piece to be my reference point for the eventual right size hole. And to get the guide hole in here, I have to use a very, very small drill bit. And a small drill bit means I need to use a special grommet or collar. I think it's called a collar, I'm not sure. This is a little bit that goes into my rotary tool that holds the actual bit in place. This is too thin for the normal collar, which is like this, but this collar is too thin for it, so I have to go digging around looking for the right size collar. Oh, it's hollow. Well, that's less helpful. It means I can't sink a magnet in there. So, guess what I can do is just get rid of it all. Alright, so this isn't strictly necessary. I'm going to hollow out, I'm going to remove that surface from this heavy bolter because it's hollow, which means I can't sink a magnet in there. And so I'm going to open it up and fill it in with epoxy putty. It isn't strictly necessary, like I said. You could just glue the magnet to whatever thin material is on there. I find that is difficult and has mixed results. So for the best results, I always just, I sink the magnets into hardened epoxy putty whenever possible, but your mileage may vary. Alright, so I've got that magnet attached to the backing, and I have the magnet sunk into the epoxy putty on the heavy flamer. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is, so I like to sink the magnets pretty far in so that they don't interfere with each other, but as long as the putty is still damp and workable, you can add a little bit on top of the magnet, and it shouldn't interfere with the magnetism, but it hides your magnet. It's just one of those little touches to make the model a little cleaner. So here's the heavy bolter. It's the same kind of idea. Here's the magnet. They're just stuck to the putty right now, but I'm going to use these ceramic tweezers and I'm going to push the magnets pretty far in, just so that they're below the surface, they're below flush. And as a result, maybe you won't get the satisfying clicking sound, but they also won't interfere, so you won't have like a weird fitting piece. There we go. Now I'm going to smooth this putty over the magnets. And so I sank a stack of 2 magnets. I'm using this size for this project. It is their 1/8 inch by 1/32 inch. The 1/8 refers to the diameter of the magnet, and the 1/32 refers to the thickness of the magnet. So I'm just going to smooth this over. And it's not going to be perfectly smooth, but you'll use, you can sand this once it's completely dry and set. And so now this should work here, kind of like so. There we go. And I'll do the same thing here. Okay, so both of these now should work, but I'm going to wait for them to dry so I can send them off and make them look a little neater than they currently are. But they're essentially magnetized and ready to go. Front-facing weapon is set. The next bit, this next bit, you know what? It's going to be the turret. That's what I'm going to do. So, here's the issue with the turret. Here's what makes it not quite as straightforward as I would like. So here's the turret. The weapon goes up here, and it uses this little tube to change elevation. So your turret can go up or down, right? And that up or down movement is facilitated by this little cylinder thing. Now into this cylinder, so I haven't glued this down so I can pry it apart. So it's supposed to be free moving, so you don't want to glue this part down. Eventually we're going to glue this turret together here, and so all you'll see is this little cylinder. But it isn't a matter of just putting a magnet in here and putting a magnet on there, and there we have our weapon. Because we have 3 weapons. We have the multi-laser, we have the heavy flamer, and we have the heavy bolter. 2 of these weapons is the same, this other one is kind of unique. So this is the piece that's going to go, So for the heavy bolter, this is the piece that's going to go onto that, onto that cylinder, and that's relatively easy, right? There's a magnet here, there's a magnet back here. That isn't a problem. The problem is that here's the heavy flamer, right? It would go in there. Same thing with a heavy, with a multi-laser, but it's not just that. There's this piece right here. It's like a little armor plate that goes over this, but you only get one armor plate, and both of these weapons use the same armor plate. So if you're going to switch from heavy flamer to the multi-laser, you need a way of taking this little armor plate with you. But you only have one. So, if I had another one, I could glue this together, and this is the assembly that is magnetized. And then my spare one, I would glue this to the heavy flamer and magnetize it there. No problem. But I only have one. Now, we can elect to just ignore it, right? And so the multi-laser would go in like that. Heavy flamer would go in like that. Pretty straightforward. But it means we don't have this piece. And that might be okay. But it's not okay for me. I need to find a way of taking this little armor plate and getting it onto the other weapon, kind of like that. So there's a couple of ways to enable that sort of thing. So basically I could magnetize this to this, and then magnetize this to the armor plate. But it's a very thin armor plate. So essentially what's going to happen is when I swap these weapons out, again, I don't know why you'd want a heavy flamer on your turret. You've already got a heavy flamer option on the front of your tank. So if you're doing this, you could just, you know what, you don't need two heavy flamers. But since this is a YouTube video, I'm not doing it the way I would want it for my army. I'm doing it the way that you might want for your army. And so maybe you want hard mode. I don't know why, but whatever, right? So in order to pull this off, we have to be at peace with the fact that this armor plate is going to be unattached to either the cylinder or to the weapon. So the magnets will go in here and in here, and when you make the swap, you swap this piece out. And I think that's the only way that's going to work. Yeah. So magnet here, this is free floating, and you're going to lose it. There's just no two ways about it. But I don't make the rules, man. I don't make the rules. So let's get a magnet in here. We'll make it a nice beefy one. Let's see if this will work. The good news is that I probably don't even need to drill in there. I can just glue it directly into that. The trick is going to be, will a magnet fit back here? Yes it would. Okay, here's the plan. Magnet's going to go in here, and instead of drilling into this little tab, so you'll see how this multi-laser has a tab, instead of drilling into the tab, I'm just going to remove it. That tab is going to be replaced in its entirety by these magnets, which is going to be weird, but I'm going to paint over it anyway. So instead of having this tab, I'll just have a stack of two magnets. That should do the trick. Yep. That's the plan. Woo! Okay, I got it. Okay, so it's in there. It's just friction fitted right now. I just kind of wanted you to see how actually pretty straightforward that is. Oh, okay, well. The tough part is getting it centered in there. Okay. It's in there. I'm going to seal it in with a little bit of glue. And that was too thick. I'm going to use this one. It's a little thinner. Okay, when these dry, they should go in. They should go onto that cylinder with zero problems. The only problem I'm going to have is this square big enough to let in a magnet, or the magnet stacks on those weapons? And it's going to be tight. So I'm going to widen this aperture just a little bit. Yep, no problem at all. No dirty jokes, please. The magnets will pass through, which means that when I do this, yeah, no problems. But I don't want to get these together until this glue dries really nicely. Otherwise, this will get stuck to the weapon permanently, and that's not what I want. So, finally, we have to add a magnet back here. So when doing this for the heavy bolter, you do want to be very careful. Normally, drilling through a plastic part isn't that big a deal because it's usually hidden or it goes into the hull, yada yada yada. In this case, drilling through means my heavy bolter part is now defaced, and I don't want that. So I have to be very, very careful to make the hole just big enough but no bigger. Now, I wonder if for this application I might need a thinner magnet, and I have some. Okay, I'm going to break out a different set of magnets. These are fine, but they're a little too thick. I want I just want a thin magnet in there. So I have some that are just the same diameter, but even thinner than these. And that's these guys. These are 1/8 in diameter. 1/8 inches in diameter by 1/64 inch in height. So I think these will do the trick. So there you go. That should do the trick. I'm a little concerned that it's not underneath that. It might work, but I won't be able to know until this dries, which I'm uncomfortable with, but there it is. I'm just going to seal it with a little bit more glue so that the magnets don't come out when I'm making the swap. I'm trying to get it on the, like, kind of around the disc of the magnet, not on top of the magnet. I don't want any more height to this little stack of magnets. All right, I'm gonna let all this dry and test it out to see if I have to do any more reworking what I've already done. This is gonna work well enough for now that we can move on to the pintle-mounted weapons. And so the way I'm going to approach this is not by magnetizing the weapon to the pintle, but instead you'll notice that each of these weapons comes in two parts. So here's the stubber, I think that's what it's called, or maybe it's an autocannon. It's probably an autocannon. But it comes in two parts. This is the ammo carrier, the ammo box. Here's the weapon itself. And they fit like this. They fit like this. And by joining them, these little pegs close around the pintle. So instead of magnetizing the weapon to the pintle, I'm going to magnetize the weapon to itself. So these two halves will be magnetized to each other. These two halves will be magnetized to each other. And if it works, we can magnetize them onto the pintle. That's the approach. Let's do some work. For these pintle-mounted weapons, we're going to start with the storm bolter. And this should be fairly straightforward. So we have these two weapons that kind of fit together like this. And the point of joining is just this one place right here. There's this tab and there's this slot. And so they go like this. That's where you would glue them on. Since we're not going to glue them on, this is going to be our point of attachment. That's where we're going to magnetize. And to do this, we're going to sink a magnet in there. Now, usually when there's a cavity like that, I'd fill it with epoxy putty, but it's generous enough cavity that I could probably fit. No, not this. So this is the 1/8 diameter. This is too wide. I need something smaller. And I think it's going to be this guy. I don't have the size of these magnets. I want to say they're probably 1/16 in diameter. Well, let me double check to make sure I got the right size here. Yeah, so I'm going to go with these. These are probably 1/16 in diameter with the same height, which is 1/32 of an inch. And so that's what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to sink it. Where'd my storm bolter go? I'm going to sink it in that cavity right there. And I don't have to fill it up with putty because it's almost as wide as I need it. So I'm going to sink in there. I'm going to just widen it up a little bit. So I can find the right size drill bit. So I don't actually want to drill into the plastic so much as I just want to widen that hole. So I'm not applying any inward pressure. I'm just trying to get a little bit of widening. Just enough that when I push the magnet in, it'll go in. Now that's just one stack, so I'm going to push it in a little further because I do want these to be pretty robust. Alright, so this one, so I've got a stack of tube magnets in there, and you can kind of see it sticking out a little bit, and that's going to cause the weapons to not attach correctly. So what I need to do is make sure that when I sink a magnet on its opposite side, it's nice and deep. More than enough. There's my hole. Now I want to make sure the polarity is right. And I'll use this different size magnet to help keep me on track. I'll flip this around. Now I should be able to just stick it in like so. And I want to make sure it goes a little deeper. There we go. So you'll notice that that magnet is in, but it's a little deeper than this one. So now, well, I probably still want to, yeah, it wasn't sitting right. It was a little wobbly, and so I'm going to dig. So I dug out that magnet, and so I'm going to just drill a little bit deeper into this hole, and that should get me the depth that I need to make sure this fits flush. Because unfortunately, a stack of a stack of one and a stack of one isn't enough to hold it in place nicely. It's a little wobbly. And I want to make sure that this is sanded as flat as possible. So that when it closes the right way. Yeah, that's a little better. So I got these to work. The trick, of course, is, does this approach actually work? If I put it on this pintle mount, will they stay there? And look at that. Oh yeah. Now, it's not perfect. There's not a whole lot of room for like a big beefy magnet, but you know, you could add additional stacks to your magnets, but it does the trick. So if I wanted to, I could maybe make this hole a little deeper, and that way I could sink a second magnet in there. Yeah, that one's in there, all right. All right. So I'll just have to learn for the next one. 3 magnets, a 2x1 array is fine, but 2x2 is probably better. But at least the idea works out. Let's work. We'll do the same principle on this guy. All right. There you have it. The same technique worked. It was a little slight. I mean, it was slightly different. And as you can see, this isn't a great. This isn't a great way to attach this weapon. With a little bit more care, you could probably do a better job than I did. Here's the weapon itself. You can see where I sunk a magnet inside the ammo box here, right on that tab where it would connect to the weapon. Here is the magnet on the weapon, and they connect like so. I think I probably have to flatten this out a little bit more. That's fine. And so, two oopsie moments. This ammo box is actually hollow. So if you drill, I thought it was going to drill and it was going to make a nice solid hole and I would be able to put magnets in there with no problem. But I didn't realize underneath it's actually hollow. So I was able to, I drilled into the box by mistake. And as a result, I had to kind of get creative. And so the magnets that are back here, I just dropped glue on them. And so that's what's keeping that magnet array in that hole. Same thing happened with this weapon. I guess it's the autocannon. As I was drilling this hole, now I knew it was too thin, but I thought I could game it. I did not. I ended up drilling it all the way through. But in a really interesting, happy little accident, you'll notice that as the magnet, it went all the way through, right? So it shows up on the other side. But it kind of looks like a weapon detail. So here it is on the inside. This is where it attaches. I drilled it through and put the magnets in, and there's a magnet sticking out on the other side of the weapon. But it doesn't look bad. It kind of just looks like a detail. And when I paint this up, it's going to look like part of the gun. So I'm not even mad about that. What I'm a little mad about is how not flat this is. Should help a little bit. Okay, it's a little better. But it is kind of a pain to put it on this pintle. It isn't a natural kind of thing with two hands. And it doesn't give you that satisfying click. But if you really, really want to do this, this is how you do it. And what I'm going to do is, once it's painted, I'm going to add a little bit of sticky tack to this pintle, and so that way it'll provide additional friction and this won't move around so much. But now I have both weapon systems. There's this guy, which kind of slides on like that, and there's this guy, which really doesn't slide on and off, but it does attach like so. So now I have both varieties of weapons on here. I'm almost done. There's one more bit of magnetizing I have to do, and that is this guy. I've never done anything quite like it. I have an idea of what I'm going to do. The idea is, so this is the Dozer blade. It's attached to this kind of an arm thing, and that is glued to the bottom of the hole. Instead of gluing it on, I'm going to attach some magnets, I think maybe to the other side of the hole. If I have strong enough magnets, I think I do. So I'll glue some magnets here and maybe in here, and then that way I can have magnets on this. I guess it's this side, and then that will stick here. That's the plan. Let's see if that works. I need to cut out some of these pieces. Right, just did some dry fitting, and I'm right about how this works. There's these two little lines on the tank and on the hull, and they align with these two little lines, and so it would go kind of like this, and so that means I have to sink some magnets inside here. This is the cab, and I have just a magnet for the job. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a size, but I think These are 1/2 inch diameter and probably 1/8 inch height. And I'm probably going to double stack those because I want these to be really strong, because it's going to hold up a decent chunk, and so it's going to have one for each side. So probably stack it 2 here, stack it 2 here. And so the tricky thing here is I need to get this stack of magnets aligned in just the right place. I need it to be just above here, centered. How do I get this centered? Well, you could do a bunch of measuring and marking and stuff like that, but I've got a cheat code. You split this in half. Oh, that's harder than it looks. And then I actually might need to smooth that out. But basically, you put half the magnet stack on the underside where you want it to go, and the top part takes care of itself. And you can move it around if you want. But you kind of have to be careful because this will try to wiggle on you. Yeah, it's a little off center. I'm not sure I like that. But I no longer have a good way of moving that over. That glue is tight, tight, tight. All right, well, it's on there now. All right, I'm adding a full 3 stacks in there. And I'm going to add a little bit of glue so these stacks are there forever. As for how I'm going to magnetize this piece, I could go with a smaller magnet and just, you know, kind of drill that out, and that should do the trick. But I want maximum power, and so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve out. Well, the good news is that the magnet that's in there is telling me exactly where I need to do this. So I'm going to get a Sharpie and mark it right on the middle, kind of like so, and that tells me where the magnet should go on this side. So here's the spot that I need to clear, and I still think I want to add a magnet of this size, so I have to clear some stuff. I'm gonna go in there with my handy dandy little grinding tool. Alright, so I did some grinding. Let's see if I've grinded enough. Ooh, just about. I still need a little bit more. So I should keep in mind that I'm doing it this way because I still want these little lines. These are basically a track that will keep things aligned on the hull. Even if I get the magnets kind of not quite centered, these tracks will help me keep things centered when it's on the model. So it's important that I have at least some of it on here. Got my divot cut out, and I've got the right orientation. I just double checked. And I think this is going to need just a single stacked magnet. There's plenty on the other side of this thing, so I'm going to add a little bit of super glue. And I think that should do the trick. And I'll verify. Oh, well, that was a mistake. I didn't let it dry. All right, let's let it dry. We'll verify after it dries. Everything seems to be dry. I've got the two magnets in here in this part of the hull, the cabin. I've got a stack of 2 and a stack of 2. I wanted to get maximum strength on this particular part because it's kind of a big beefy part, and it has this other component that's pretty big and beefy too. So you want to make sure that it doesn't droop, or you want to make sure it's good. So I've got a single magnet for each of these here. I tried just doing one, but this piece is too heavy to just do one. You really do need both of them. So one magnet here, 2 magnets there, left and right sides, and we have a magnetized Dozer blade. Pretty sure it's centered. It's just this is missing this track. And I think I need to make sure that when I do glue it, that it's facing up a little bit. But yeah, there it is. So with this piece, I have everything magnetized that I was going to magnetize. I'm going to put this together and I'm going to prime it so that you can see what it looks like. So right now it looks pretty trashy, right? There's this big old thing that looks horrible. Okay, that's fine. This is not bad. The weapons, they're kind of janky looking right now. I'm pretty sure that once I prime it, this is going to look pretty good. So I'm going to finish the build off camera. I'm going to prime all the parts, and then I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. I was doing the final assembly on the Chimera, and I realized I had forgotten this lovely little piece of war gear. I don't know if anyone's ever going to use the Hunter-Killer missile on a Chimera, but you might, right? So in the interest of you might, I'm going to magnetize this piece too and add it to the model kit. And what I'm going to do, well, what I'm going to try to do, is I'm going to try to magnetize the missile to its launcher and glue the launcher on the tank where it belongs. The idea is that, let's say you just decide, no, I'm not taking the Hunter-Killer missile because these 5 points can get me, I don't know, 12 troopers. It's exaggeration, but you know what I mean. Comparatively speaking, a Hunter-Killer missile on a Chimera, it might be too expensive to take. So if you don't take it, you remove the missile, but the launcher stays in place. So it looks like, it's part of the model, and it looks like it's intentional. Like sometimes this missile goes there, sometimes it doesn't. I think that's a neat effect, and so I'm going to. So I'm finding the little tabs. So on the missile itself, you'll notice a couple of little tabs. So right in the middle of those tabs, I'm going to drill a hole. I don't know if this missile is solid or hollow. I'm guessing it's hollow, but I'm going to try to drill through here so I can add some very small magnets. This is a very light piece, but I do want to use both because if you have just one, it'll be hanging off the thing. So I'll do one of each here, and then I'll do something similar here. I'll shave off these tabs, sink a small hole in both of these places, and that should be the trick. So let's start making some holes. Yep, it doesn't look hollow. I think it's a solid piece of plastic, and I'm gonna widen the hole up just a little bit because I kind of checked the magnet size. It's a little bigger than this drill bit. All right, so I've got the magnets mounted. I can already see that was very poor execution. This is going to be a crooked missile mount. I don't like it. Yeah, you can't win them all. You can't win them all. I had to go in there with a different little tool, my rotary, tool. And so basically just sliced out a part of the rail. Instead of drilling a hole, the part is too thin to drill a hole kind of reliably. And this kind of thing, like you just cut out a piece of the rail so the magnet goes in there, that'll work fine too. So that's how I got this taken care of. This is the drill bit that I used. I feel like it's the engraving bit. I'm not 100% sure, but it doesn't do a great job of going in, but it does do a good job of slicing sideways. So I use this tool. Here's the missile, and goes on kind of like this. And you know what? I got the polarities wrong. Time to flip this around. Yay! Alright, I flipped these around, and it wasn't that big a deal because of the fact that I didn't make a hole. I just kind of sliced out a notch, and so it was really easy to pry these off. And so now they should work. Yep. Even has that satisfying click. And it isn't as crooked as I thought it was going to be. Barely noticeable. So, if you decide to spend the money, the points on the 100 kilo missile, boom, it goes on your mount. If you decide, nah, I'll use those 5 points somewhere else, this is going to be on your tank. And I believe it goes someplace like here. Yeah, in reality, that's a pretty bad place for a weapon. It's gonna impact the ability of the turret to move around. But also, if this was a real tank, those treads are spinning around, spitting up mud. It's gonna get all over the missile and change its flight characteristics. Not a great design. Clearly, it was just a bolt-on. So I think that is just about that. Oh, this radar dish did not glue the way it was supposed to, so I'm going to try it one more time. All right. I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup, especially my workspace. Holy cow, there's a lot of stuff on here, and I am not a fan. This always happens when I do any magnetizing. My work area becomes a disaster really quickly. But it's done. All right. Do a last minute check. Then it's time for a prime. Then I'll show off our little Chimera. Here is our cute little Chimera. She's primed. She's looking pretty good. And you can see the front-facing weapon port. It blends in pretty good. It doesn't look quite as shabby now that it's primed. There was a kind of a weird, not a weird issue, but unexpected issue priming with these weapons. So you want to make sure that when you prime them, the weapons are pointed up and out of the way. But they don't stay there, so they'll kind of droop over, and then you end up with kind of weird coverage. So some little parts on the little ball socket there that are unprimed. So when I do paint this model, I'm going to have to pay attention to that stuff. I don't want gray stuff kind of being weirdly showing up on the model. So that's something to think about. You also want to make sure to focus your attention at the bottom of the tank as well. So get both sides. Got good coverage. And so I'm going to add this first element, which I thought was pretty cool, is the Dozer blade. There it is. Looks pretty decent. And looking at the Dozer blade kind of unit, it doesn't look bad. It looks like it's supposed to work like this. So I like the way that turned out. And so that way you can kind of store your model like this or display it. And if you're running it and you don't want to pay the extra points for the Dozer blade, now I don't know for a fact that it's extra points, but in case it is, you could always just boop, it's gone. Okay, the next thing I'm going to put on is the front-facing sponson weapon. I'm reaching over to my painting paddle, removing these primed pieces that are nice and dry. Here is the heavy bolter, and swap that out with a heavy flamer. Neat. I'll keep the heavy bolter on there for now. It's the most likely configuration that I would use. So the next piece, I guess, is going to be the turret. And yeah, for all of these pieces, you want to make sure to, when you prime them, get up, both the up and the down, or get all sides of the part that you're talking about. Technically speaking, you don't necessarily have to paint the bottom of it, but as long as you're out there priming, get it done. It'll look better when it's all said and done. All right. So there is the turret. It does go up and down. All right, which means that I get my part. See how the magnet doesn't look bad? It looks like it's part of the model for the most part. And we put the armor part on there. And there we have a working turret with elevation. Like I said, it's the hinge is pretty loose, so you might want to do something about it. If if it bothers you, if not, then there it is. And so that piece we can swap out with the heavy flamer. So grab the armor piece, and there you are. You now have a heavy flamer. And if you want to swap out the heavy bolter, boom, you now have a heavy bolter on your Chimera. I'm going to keep it in the multi-laser configuration. That's how I know it's a Chimera. These other two things are just weird to me, but whatever. You'll notice that the backs are also primed. It makes them look a little less shabby. The next piece that we're going to add, just because it's easy and simple, is the hunter-killer missile. There it is. Nothing special about it, but it's on there. And last but not least, we have the storm bolters. It's a little hard to see where I'm going with this. And now that they're primed, it's a little harder to handle. They're not as loose as they were before the primer. So there's a storm bolter. And there is autocannon, stubber, whatever this weapon is. And I think I'm going to keep it in this configuration. I like the way it looks with the longer barrel. So there it is. There's my Chimera. Yeah, it's all set, and I really like the way it looks. This was a pretty straightforward build. It's weird. The thing I had the most problem last time I built a tank, it was the Wyvern / Hydra, was the tracks. I had to kind of play with the orientation of the tracks. It was a little weird, but having already done this once before, putting them on for the Chimera, it was a breeze. This is one of those cases where a bit of practice really does make you better. The other thing that was better is there's actually no cracks on the model. In the Wyvern, there were some gaps between the hull and the track, and back here. And so now that I built this guy, I mean, there's a bit of a seam here, but it's fine. And it's certainly better than the last attempt I made. So again, it's one of those deals where a bit of practice makes you better at this. And since a lot of the vehicles are based on the Chimera chassis, I feel like that's a skill that'll be transferable to a bunch of other models. I do like all the options that this vehicle has to offer. There's a bunch of little doohickeys. There's some handles here on the back hatch, although I don't know why there's a back hatch if there's a rear hatch. But maybe if the thing kind of tips over, maybe you want to use the roof access. I don't know. The point is, there's a lot of little details on here that are kind of cool. There's the Aquila right there. Yeah, it's pretty neat. I have a really good idea how I'm going to paint this. Oh, this one was kind of silly. There's this little tow hook that goes on the rear hatch, and it goes on the rear hatch for some reason. It would probably be better suited going down here, like on one of the structural elements, but it's on the door. If you have a heavy load, all that load's going to be transferred to the door. It seems like a weird place to put it. Probably just an oversight from Games Workshop. It's fine. So, yeah. Straightforward build. Really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to painting this bad boy up. It's going to look a lot like my Wyvern, and that's okay. So, just a few closing remarks on the magnetization. It isn't that bad. Most of the magnetization is pretty straightforward. It's a little finicky, kind of labor intensive, but that's no different from any other magnetization project. Having said all that, why would you go through all this trouble? Take it with a multi-laser. Take it with a stubber or a stone bolter. Find a configuration that works for you and use that. Primarily because my understanding is that these are often taken in squads. So your army probably won't have one Chimera. It'll have 3 Chimeras probably, right? And so doing this magnetization process for all 3, it sounds like a real pain in the butt. So I did it. For those of you who are curious to see if it could be done, I don't think anyone has ever asked the question, can the Chimera be magnetized? Didn't stop me from doing it though, just because I could. And I liked it. I even enjoyed the magnetization process. I think I'm getting better at thinking through the project, and actually my skills at manipulating the putty and drilling, I think my skills are improving there too. So that's the whole point, right? Getting better at something every day. Can't complain about that. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed watching this, and if you are inspired to do something like this, or if you're curious about it, like, you know what, I just really want to swap out the main turret weapon, take whatever bits and pieces of this video that seem most applicable to you, and, apply them to your own models. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your attention. If you enjoyed the contents of this video, consider giving this video a like. Perhaps a subscribe so you can see all the other content that I've been producing and will continue to produce for at least a little while longer. Yeah. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.